All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. My name is Eric McBay. I am the Director of Special Projects for the National Farmers Union Ontario. And this is a joint workshop between the National Farmers Union Ontario and the Ontario Farmland Trust. And we're very grateful to the support for the support of the Greenbelt Foundation in funding this workshop. So this workshop about farm financing and business is part of our series about succession and general land linking work. In a few minutes, I'll post into the chat a questionnaire that can help you find or help us to help you find some land linking matches if you are a land holder or a land seeker, and also a link to give us some input on what you would like to see from future workshops in this series. So I am a farmer just east of Kingston, Ontario. I live on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee. I invite you to introduce yourselves in the chat to say where you're from and the Indigenous territories if you know. As you may have heard, this workshop is being recorded so that we can share it on YouTube. But we won't share the contents of the chat. If you have any technical problems during the course of the workshop this evening, I invite you to send me a direct message through the chat. We'll be going till approximately 8:30, but that's flexible depending on how many questions people have. We will have ample time for questions and discussion at the end of the workshop, and I'll invite you to either put your questions into the chat or just save them till the end of the presentation, till both of our speakers have presented. So we have two wonderful speakers joining us tonight. We have Sally Miller from the Fair Finance Fund, and we have Isabel Rodet from Vintage Soil Farm. Sally will be speaking first, so let me introduce her. Sally Miller, MA, PhD, MES, is the project manager for the Fair Finance Fund. She's worked in food and agriculture and co-ops for over 25 years, including the local food and farm co-ops, the Ontario Natural Food Co-op, Organic Meadow, Fourth Paid Worker Co-op, West End Food Co-op, and Finger Lakes Organic Growers Co-op, US. She has sat as treasurer and director on various boards. Publications include Edible Action, Food Activism and Alternative Economics, Fernwood Press 2008, and Belongings, The Fight for Land and Food, Fernwood 2016, and numerous research reports. Sally, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. I always love speaking with the NFUO members, and so this is great. I share my screen.
Yes, it's all, the floor is yours.
Okay. So talking with Eric about what I would be covering, I have sort of a number of topics, so I'm going to get into it, and then I'm actually going to give you an agenda so you sort of know where we're going as we work through the journey of financing food lands. And I have my land acknowledgement here, so I didn't put it in the chat. This is the Fair Finance Fund land acknowledgement because we are provincial. So I'm in Toronto, on the traditional territory of Mississaugas of the Credit, Anishinaabe, Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people. And I also like to mention in the virtual years that to remember that the ability to meet this way and to function virtually is also due to resources coming from native and formerly native land. So something to keep in mind, that we're still grateful for all the ability that we have, acknowledging that. So the Fair Finance Fund, we are a social finance fund dedicated to the local food and farm sector. We've only been around since 2019. And we provide equitable and accessible capital specifically to all across the food system, but enterprises that can show that they have social and environmental benefits. And in fact, that's in the preliminary applications, the very first thing we do is to make sure that the organization has social purpose. So you can imagine that one of the things that's happened because of that is that more than 50% of our investments are with ecological and organic farmers. So I'm very proud of that, to have been able to help so many, especially young farmers, get on the land, get started, get the equipment they need, and all that. So here's my agenda. I'm going to give you an overview of land and food. I'm not going to go on with that too long because there are some significant barriers and challenges, and that can get really depressing. So I'm just going to set that as the context. I'll talk about financial options that exist now and tie that in to the questions of alternatives and structure, because that's a big part of figuring out your finance options and how you want to do it is also looking at your structures and who has access to the land. And then I'll give you some big ideas for the future, drawing on ideas from around the world. And we will look also at just a few questions to put out to you if you're thinking of getting financing from the Fair Finance Fund or something like that. Some questions to ask yourself about your finances. And it's one of the things we do is that we work with people long before they get the loan application in, to help them get things ready and think about cash flows and all that. So that's a big part of what we do. So the 2022 view from above. As you know, we are facing an unregulated market for land, which means that as farmers get older, often with considerable debt to have built their farm business, the only way that they can retire and have a pension is to sell the land. And like those of us who live in urban areas, farmers should have the right to sell the land for what they can sell it for. So we in Toronto talk about how much the value of our house has gone up. Farmers should be able to access that too. Problem is, when they do that, the only way they can do that is to sell to developers because the market's unregulated. So we need new ways of protecting farmland. One of the things that's very important about this that I sort of keep bringing up, especially to government officials and things like that, is to remember that a conversion of land is like a contagion. So once one farmer has had to sell their land to a developer, the other farmers no longer have the same access to bartering for things. They're not sharing hedgerows anymore. They're dealing with people who come from the city and might not like lights on tractors, and they move away too. And from the interviews that I did for my book Belongings, one of the things that really came out of it was not so much, it was access to land, but it was access to an agricultural community. So we have to keep coming back to that, how important it is for farmers working with other farmers. And I always say, like, barter is such a huge part of farming for big farmers, small farmers, new farmers, all of them. And it's just not recognized, the social capital of you being able to exchange with farmers near you. The other thing that's happening is that we're in the big transition. So a lot of farmers are very close to being at an age when they'd probably like to retire rather than falling dead at their tractor. And we have a transition going on where the new generation of farmers are coming in, are people like Isabel, who's going to talk soon, and people who are organic, and people who are selling direct, and people who are farm co-ops. And all these things are not well understood by standard capital. And so people are facing real barriers to the kind of structure and changes we need to have a really resilient, awesome food system in Ontario and Canada. So, and that's further changes in the farmer demographics, meaning that there are lots of people who are not coming to farming because their parents were farmers, but they're coming because they are committed to it. And that means that when they go to get their agricultural loan, they're not talking to somebody that their parents and their grandparents talked to. They're coming in fresh. And there's some very important BIPOC farmers who face even more challenges because of inherent systemic racism in lending. So all these things coming together to what could be a crisis unless we think of a new way to do it. So these are, so I don't need to go over all of these too much. I mentioned some of them, but we know that agricultural values are being exceeded in Southern Ontario, making it very hard for people to get on the land they need. Um, we're very proud of this one. This photo is Rooted Oak. Many of you probably know Stuart. And we help them get on a property that they're going to be able to stay on for a while. So we're really proud of that, and help them create a pond to siphon some of the water off their land. And so I love seeing them standing there in their field. So, but they ended up over right near the Quebec border. People are going to Northern Ontario. And if you are, again, this is a greater problem for BIPOC farmers, because they often have community and markets established right in the urban areas. They may even be doing some kind of urban agriculture. And that means that they are then trying to access land to be able to stay near their markets. They're trying to access land which is going for 30,000 an acre, whatever, even if it's in the green belt. So it's that's the challenge. And then of course consolidation is continuing. So farmers who are established are just buying up properties that aren't even going into the market. They're just picking them up. And that's particularly supply management is really needed, but we need everybody to be supply managed so that they can all have that kind of confidence to buy the land they need. Otherwise, we end up with people who are supply managed being able to buy land and other people not being able to. The other issue that is facing us is the severance rules, which were designed in Ontario to protect farmland, so make it very hard to sever below 100 acres. And also very hard to put a residence on. So for a while, some of the interviews I did talk with older farmers, they're like, oh yeah, you know, that guy, he retired 19 or 20 times, just taking pieces of his land off one at a time, severing one at a time, and, you know, having people who weren't farmers coming into the community. So they were trying to stop that. But now with the new kinds of farming and the changes, which should be really exciting, we're looking at people who only need 25 acres not being able to get on land and not being able to live on their land. So severance is not really achieving what the government had hoped. And then I think sort of my last thing I put up there is I think it's fascinating to me that I'm hearing. That's not me. I'm hearing. It's definitely not me, I don't think. So as people are moving north or east, going into the limestone areas like in Renfrew County and things like that, there's actually some really important work going on, which is challenging the question that the assumptions about soil class. So, you know, the standard thing is 50% of class 1 lands in Canada are in Southwest Ontario, but we're seeing some really important work and some scientific work from places like EFAO and things like that, looking at varieties, soil, why limestone might be important for the nutritional value of the vegetables you grow, all that. Fascinating and really, really important to look at. So into finance, here's some sort of basic finance options. I think probably people know about this, but I'll just sort of run through it. So one is the Canadian Agricultural Loan Act. So I know some people who have used that to be able to get mortgages. Farm Credit Canada also. Looking at the experiences that people are having is that in each of these cases, they are looking for someone to go first. And so even for people who have been established for a while, they all want somebody who's sort of the first loss capital, which means the loan that goes in first that would be lost if something went wrong with the business. And that's where something like Fair Finance Fund comes in. Carrot Cash, giving very small grants for farms and food enterprises. Places like Kindred Credit Union, which are very focused on agricultural financing. So if you're in Southwest Ontario, they're very knowledgeable, and they've come out of the Mennonite community, but they're having less knowledge, I think, about the sort of new farming world. So when they talk about it, it's people, oh, I've been working with that family for generations, right? You also have the options of taking your incorporated business, selling equity, so selling shares, or selling community bonds. Community bonds are a kind of, it's called quasi equity. It's a kind of debt. So you would sell somebody a bond in 5 years, you would give them back the principal and maybe and some interest. So that's been a really useful way to doing it. Shares are, there's a couple of problems with shares. One is that if you're a standard corporation, not a co-op, people vote their shares, right? So you don't want to lose control of your business. An advantage to you of selling a few shares is that you don't have to give dividends if you don't make any money. Whereas with community bonds, you've committed to give the interest and everything. So, and we used to raise the almost 2 million we have now in the Fair Finance Fund. We use community bonds. So something like the Fair Finance Fund, which I'll talk about more. And then I just have to mention, we in Ontario need to think bigger. And there's a fantastic example in Quebec, FIRA. Now I'm not going to mangle the French, but it's a fund which is specifically for farmers who are trying to get on land, trying to get started, who have gone through the agricultural college. And it's been really important for getting young farmers on land. And it was funded at 70 million by Desjardins Credit Union and the Quebec government. And why don't we do that here? I'm ready. Anyway, so here's what we are doing. We are a revolving loan fund, meaning that we are expecting to be in perpetuity, and whenever people make a loan payment, which is a combination of the interest and the principal, that principal goes out again to another farmer, another food entrepreneur. We don't use any of the capital for operations at all, which makes us unusual among funds, actually. And we've had other fund managers look at us and go, "You're not spending enough money on operations." Like, no, we want the, first and foremost, we're mission driven. So that's what we're trying to do. So we offer the debt financing loans. We try to keep the interest as low as we can, and still be continuously self-sustaining. And we offer technical assistance. So every loan client gets 10 free hours with a mentor of their choice. We have a pool of about 30 registered mentors who are amazing, who can help with everything from soil health to marketing, everything you can think of, bakers, all kinds of things. As long as the organizations are purpose-driven and locally owned and selling to regional markets, we'll consider any type of business. They have to be incorporated. They can be at any stage and anywhere across the sector. So, and I should say, one of the things about looking at the whole sector, rather than just doing, like, we considered we could just do farming, and over 50% of our loans are going to farmers, but we're really trying to build strong local food and ag-based economies. Like, the food and agriculture enterprises are anchors in our communities, and they are so if you're trying to do community economic development, to me, investing in across the food system to develop strong local production, strong regional markets, this is the way we're going to build Ontario's economy. So we now do loans from 20 to 200,000. We don't require collateral up to 100,000. Between 100 and 200, we do some form of security. We, as I said, we'll do subordinated debt, which would mean that if somebody's trying to buy a piece of property, we would be open to being the first one to come in, to put down enough money to inspire the other more risk-averse lenders to follow. And then we have the Real Assist mentorship program, which is very carefully designed. All the mentors know that they are required to do hands-on assistance, so they're not just supposed to, like, call you up and go, "Hey, why don't you write a business plan? I'm done." They actually have to sit down, work with people. So we have vetted them to make sure that they're going to provide real hands-on assistance. And we called it the Real Assist program because it's like the hockey assist. where it's actually a significant statistic if you're the assist at a hockey game. So our mentors have to be the real assist. So this slide is actually the most important one to me in what we do. And I just keep reiterating this. We believe we're not just doing the social purpose-driven businesses because we think it's ethically right, which we do. It's also the reason that our clients do so well. Like, to me, I think I can't imagine why you wouldn't invest in people with social purpose, because that's part of their success. It's a key to their success. So I think a lot of people look at social finance as being, you're going to make a return and then you'll take a little less on your investment because they're engaging the community or something. To me, if you're a farm engaging the community, then you're halfway there, right? That's part of succeeding. Climate resilience as well. Like, I wouldn't want to invest in a farm that wasn't thinking about climate resilience. So again, they're essential to our future food security. So here's an overview of who we invest in. All over Ontario, working capital, equipment, inventory, land, a whole range of things. We do invest in people who are pretty early stage. And really, we just look, if you give us a convincing case that you're going to be able to pay, then we're good. So things have already changed since I did this slide 2 days ago. But we're at 1.75 million that we've raised. We've actually approved over $1 million in loans. And the rest of this is we track the jobs, we track regional suppliers actually that our investees affect, because again, we're looking at the whole regional economy. So that's one of the metrics that we, as people know, we come back every 6 months and check on their local food sales, their jobs created or expanded, and regional suppliers that they buy from. And then we ask them also to track social and environmental, 2 other indicators of their choice, so customized for the kind of work they do. And that could be, in the case of the chocolate bike delivery company we invested in, they're tracking their bike miles, so offset delivery with a standard gas. So the Fair Finance Fund is great. We're very proud of it, but we want people to come with having thought through just the kind of investment they want. So in the case of equity, you have to ask yourself, do I want to share control? Debt, we don't have any control over who we're investing in. We just try to support them so they thrive. But you want to think, do I want to have a debt? How much debt should I have? And then quasi-equity, when you have investment from somebody like the Fair Finance Fund, as I said, you've got somebody who's actually going to help you go to other more conventional investors and persuade them. And I say not all debt is created equal because of that. And then also because when you pay back, every time you make a loan payment, you know that principal is going to somebody else like you. It's not going to Arkansas or anywhere like that. It's just staying in the Ontario food sector. So I encourage you to think about the impacts of the financial choices. Where's the money coming from? Where's it flow to? And that affects where you take your debts. And so a lot of the people who answered our very first survey before we'd started said that they were using their credit cards for funding their sort of day-to-day operations. So think about where payments to the credit cards are going and who you're supporting there. And places that do social finance, you're supporting other people like you. So I'm going to skip these because I want to get to the bit after this, but this is their impact. So at this point, 72, it's actually more than that, but 72 jobs expanded or maintained. We assess 151 regional suppliers that have been supported through the expansion of our loan clients. And we have over 5 million increase in local food sales from through our support. Oops, sorry. So back to the question of finance in more general terms. I've talked a bit about shares. One of the things you need to think about is what your incorporation structure is. And I've done a lot of work in co-ops. There's a lot of advantages to forming a co-op. And you can have, there've been a sort of resurgence of farm co-ops that are usually worker co-ops. And the workers may put a little equity in. The equity may come out of the profits as they work and build. That's actually how the big carrot got started. There's lots of different ways to do it, but the hybrid models that I mentioned here are important because if you look at the community farms in British Columbia, you can see how they have used the co-op model and the land trust model to really do some powerful work of protecting farmland. So Glorious Organics that's listed here, that's a worker co-op that runs the farm business on a piece of property which is actually owned by another co-op who are investors who have put the land into farmland in perpetuity through a land trust. So you don't have to solve it all with one structure. Just like the folks on Bay Street, you just can create different structures to fit what you need. So here's some co-op finance models. You all might know about some of these, but there's some real advantages to forming a co-op and being able to work next to farmers who complement what you're doing, right? So you might be doing fruit and vegetables, you need some compost, you've got somebody else who wants to work near you who's doing livestock. Obviously, you can do some trade there. I mentioned Finger Lakes Organic where I worked. That's a marketing co-op for organic farmers. So in that case, the farmers would tell me what they had on Monday. I would sell it like crazy and deliver it all. I would give them the orders. They'd bring it Tuesday morning. I deliver it all by Wednesday morning, mostly to New York City. So marketing co-ops are great. Equipment co-ops for sharing equipment, mostly being used in Quebec, but I hope somebody in Ontario is going to do it. So I think there's land access innovation that's happening as well. And one of the things that came out of the interviews for my last book was people saying that the problem, it wasn't so much that they had to own the land, but they wanted to be able to get equity and they wanted to know they were going to be there a long time. So it's tenure security. And right now, the language we have to speak tenure security is private property. But there are other ways to do this. And around the world, there have been lots of ways of knowing that you could have tenure security. So an advantage of a co-op is that you can have equity. You can have shares in a co-op. Say your shares could be, say it's a 100-acre farm. Everybody's got 10 to 25 acres that they can call their own. Your number of shares could be based on how many acres you have. If you decide that you actually want to go off and start selling cars, you can sell your shares back to somebody else who wants to farm. So it's a really good way to sort of make sure that you get equity as well as having long-term tenure security. That's one of Mapleton's cows getting a back massage. Other options, public land, community land, land trusts, and I've talked a bit about the farm co-ops. And it says fair finance fund dreams, and this is where I'm gonna try to wrap up here. We are working right now on a project called Inclusive Prosperity, where we are looking at ways to create a farm co-op or a collective model where underserved communities, so people who really don't have generational wealth, really have no way of getting access to land, BIPOC farmers, are able to get on the land, do the farming they want to do, get some equity out of it. And if they need to move on to something else, they still can, or they could be there for the rest of their lives. So we're working on that model using our resources. And I have some other things, but I think I'm running out of time. Can I have another minute, Eric? Or
Absolutely, yes.
okay. So this is one of the things, Eric, you did ask me to mention. So there's regulatory and policy things that we could be lobbying for. NFU is absolutely one of the important groups that could be lobbying for these things. So, and this is where we have to start looking at examples from other places. So in Maryland, there has been a regulatory penalty for conversion. So even if a developer buys land and says it's going to be in farmland, I'm keeping it in farmland, 5 years later turns it into housing, they are fined. And they're fined the difference in the land value between what would have been a farmland. And so that's a great model. Cost of community services, a really important thing, and as far as I know, has only been done in Red Deer, Alberta. It's used in the US a lot. And it's a way of showing that agricultural communities provide funds and taxes into a municipality, whereas housing development takes it out because of the cost of sewers and all those services. So it's a very concrete kind of thing that you could take to the government and go, if you're looking at economic development, think about this. I put in large agricultural protected belts because the farmers that I interviewed a couple of years ago, they said, well, here's my solution. Let's green belt the whole province. So there you go. Would be one way to do it. And then correction of the severance rules is just, to me, this is just its time, but it takes a long time. So I'm almost more interested in trying for allowance for farm co-op housing or agrominiums or something, so that we can have people living on the land together, running different farm businesses. And some of that depends on what the municipality is willing to do. So beyond Canada, amazing things are happening. The Scotland Land Fund, I think NFU University did a thing on them. Really exciting stuff about getting land back from absentee landowners who are just using it as an investment. Land for Maine's future in the state of Maine, they had a referendum that said that millions had to be put into protecting Maine's wild and farmlands. And then Via Campesina, working with all over the world for changing our relationship to land. And this picture is actually India from Ekta Parashad, thousands of landless farmers marching to Delhi to demand access to land. It was a few years ago, but very moving. And that fight continues. And then in other places, there are more ways to look at funding. These are some awesome examples. Shorefest, I'll just point out this last one. That's where the picture is. That's Fogo Island in Newfoundland. They have developed this incredible integrated community economy. They're starting a social finance fund, and it's the Fogo Island Fishery Co-op and this big, gorgeous hotel that's like the greenest building in Canada. And they do economic nutrition labeling that shows the benefit to the community of each of the things that their businesses do. So they're really cool. Plus they have a gorgeous website. So I went over a bit. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you to our funders. And I'm done.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sally. If you have questions, I invite you to put those in the chat and I'll make note of them, or you can just save them until the end, when we'll have plenty of time for discussion at that point. For those of you who came in partway through, thanks for joining us. You just heard from Sally Miller of the Fair Finance Fund. I'm Eric McBay from the National Farmers Union Ontario, and I'm excited to introduce our next speaker, Isabel Rodet. Isabel is the owner and operator of Vintage Soil Farm. Isabel spent 6 years working on a variety of organic farms in Ontario, BC, and Quebec before starting Vintage Soil Farm this past year. Vintage Soil, currently located on rented land in the Ottawa Valley, uses draft power in the field and adheres to the organic certification standard for all their growing. Isabel, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, thank you. Let me just get my screen up here. Great. Okay, so hi everyone. Like Eric said, my name is Isabel. And firstly, I just want to start by acknowledging that I'm on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to be present in this territory and to farm here. So vintage soil farm, like Eric just said, we just wrapped up our first growing season, which is very exciting. And I'll be totally candid with you about my experiences, so don't hesitate to ask any questions in the Q&A part. So here's a little bit of an outline of what I'll be talking about today. And you'll just have to bear with me because I've just barely switched from field mode to computer mode. So it's a pretty basic PowerPoint presentation that you're going to be getting. Yeah. Here we go. So a little bit of the background of my farming history. I spent 6 years working on organic farms, like Eric said. So all throughout Ontario and Quebec and BC. And the reason that I did that, quite frankly, was for a couple reasons. Firstly, I wanted to learn on someone else's time instead of my own. And secondly, I went to university before I started farming. So I had school debt that I wanted to start paying back before I even wanted to think about taking on a business. So it really was kind of a necessity to work a little bit before jumping into starting my own thing. I spent the majority of my time farming, working in BC, and I always had the plan to move back to Ontario when I was ready to start my own business. And that happened to be, I moved back in 2020. And I think we all know what happened in 2020. So I spent one season working at a farm in Quebec, and the plan was to buy a farm that year and then start my own business in 2021. And that is just not what happened. It was kind of crazy, as you know, and once we finally settled into our new COVID reality and we're ready to start looking at buying, the market had already gone even crazier than it already was. And I quickly realized that I would have to look at land rental opportunities as at the same time as looking for something to buy. So that timeline kind of takes us to around July or August of 2020. And that's when I really started to dig into my business plan. And I had no idea where to start. So I spent 6 years farming, and before that I did an environmental degree. So I didn't know the first thing about writing a business plan or how to go about business development. So I actually got connected to a local small business center, and through them they connected me with an organization called Futurepreneurs, and that became my starting point for my business plan. Before I talk about the business plan and Futurepreneurs, I'm just going to give like a tiny little plug to small business centers. I'm sure wherever you guys are located that there is a small business center in your area. And if you're looking to start a farm or you're currently farming, don't hesitate to reach out to them. I have had nothing but incredible support from, I've worked with 2 different ones now. One small business center reviewed my business plan a bunch before I felt comfortable giving it to any lenders to look at, which was amazing. And then the one that's in my area that I'm in now, they ran a program in the spring where small businesses could apply, and then they subsidized meetings with professionals of your choice. So I chose accounting, you could choose a lawyer or marketing. There was really a ton of options. So they exist to make their local small businesses succeed. So really look them up if you can. Back to the business plan and Futurepreneurs. So Futurepreneurs is an organization that exists fully to provide working capital to startups. And I thought that I might apply to them for a loan. So I decided to use their business plan builder that they have online. And I really liked their model. I don't know if anyone has done a business plan or is currently working on one, but I found it to be a really dense document to work on, and I really appreciated that the business plan builder broke it up into sections, so it was just a little bit easier to work through. And then they also provided a spreadsheet that allowed you to work through and build out your 3-year financial projections. And then eventually I grew that to a 5-year plan, but that was a really helpful thing. Instead of starting with just a blank spreadsheet, it was already a little bit of the legwork done. So before I move forward into the next slides, I'll just give a little disclaimer that some of the numbers that I'm dealing with for my farm might not be the representative of what you want for yourself or your farm. Loans can be daunting and monthly payments can be totally overwhelming. So I think it's really important that if you're looking at starting your own business, you assess what your risk tolerance is. And for me, I knew that I wanted to invest in my business in year 1 and then grow from there. So it's 100% possible to invest less than I did and still have a successful business. Okay, so I always knew that I was going to have to look into financing options. I had saved up about $10,000 and I knew this wasn't going to be enough to do what I wanted to do in year 1. Being a young person with school debt and no real assets. So I don't have a house, I don't have land. And at the time I didn't have any equipment that had a serial number on it. So I knew that big banks or more traditional lenders weren't readily going to lend me money. As I was finishing up my business plan, so this was around November 2020, I got connected to the landowners who I ended up renting from. So based on a word of mouth agreement, which I don't think I recommend to anyone, but based on that and a promise to sign a lease in the new year, I moved to where I am now, which is in Kemptville, just outside of Ottawa. And then I kind of got going with, I finished my business plan and went straight into lease development and moving forward with securing farm financing. So for my lease specifically, I used the Young Agrarians template, which is also on the NFU website, and a little bit of the details of my lease. So I have a yearly lease. It goes from January to January, and it's renewed in August so that I can change any fall planting if I need to. I pay $70 per acre plus hydro and a CSA bin, which is a lot. Here, $70 an acre seems to be fair market value. So I definitely wouldn't hesitate to drop that price if you're looking at renting land and you're going to give a CSA box. That's just what we ended up doing. And then in addition to that, I have to carry valid farm liability insurance, which you have to do if you're going to market anyway, as well as insurance for my draft team. In terms of the farm financing, because of the scale that I chose to start at, I farmed 1.5 acres. In total, I rented 6 acres, but that was broken up into 1.5 acres of veg, some space for my team and equipment, and then a couple of fields of cover crop, and then one field that was just weeds and rocks all summer. So I did 1.5 acres of veg, 27 CSA members, farm stand, and 2 markets. So because I wanted to do that much stuff, I had higher startup costs than other farms might have in year 1. My $10,000 quickly went towards my draft team and their equipment and a used greenhouse that I had bought from a friend. And then I needed to figure out securing working capital to finance the rest of the things that you need to start a farm. So that's where the obstacle was. Financing for straight equipment is a lot easier. Like if I wanted to buy a set of discs or a tractor, it's a lot easier to get financing for something like that because that equipment has a serial number on it, and a lender always has the assurance that if something happens and you can't make your payments, they can always seize that piece of equipment that has weight and value to them. Whereas I was looking for funding for like wobbler lines and drip tape, which is just a little bit different than a tractor. So because I didn't have anything that could be used as collateral to a loan or, the real assets, it was just a little bit more of a workaround. I had applied to Fair Finance Fund while also going through the application process with Futurepreneurs, who I did my business plan with. And in the end, I decided to just move forward with Fair Finance Fund. So there was a couple main reasons for that. I really liked working with an organization that was mainly working with food-based businesses. Like it was really easy to give them my business plan and my projections, and they understood my numbers and like what I was talking about and farmers markets and things like that. And the other reason was working with lenders who don't work with agricultural businesses just have no idea what's going on in our industry. So it was like a very slow uphill battle and a lot of back and forth with other lenders who just didn't really understand what I was trying to do and why it was possible to do what I was trying to do. So the next slide is a lot to look at, but I just threw it together the other day. So it's a quick and very, very rough breakdown of like what my working capital went towards financing. It's super rough numbers, so please don't use it to base anything financial on at all. It's just to give you a little example of what I mean when I'm talking about working capital. So as I started making the farm come to life and purchasing things and really like doing stuff, I realized that there was a couple things that I didn't take into consideration when I spent those months poring over spreadsheets and making as many financial plans and projections as I could. I missed things because we're all human. So I was really grateful that when I had done my financial plan, I had put a safety factor into my finances that I had just in case I did things wrong, or if not, I had money left over to move to the next year. It's those unexpected costs. One thing that I totally overlooked, which was so silly, was shipping. I quickly realized that from any supplier anywhere, if you want one shipment to come to you on a pallet, it's going to cost you $200. Like that's just what it is, and those like $200, they add up, they stack on top of each other. So that was something I quickly realized next year I'm gonna have to budget that in. And then there's the real actual logistics of just running a farm. So my cooler, for example, I bought a used cooler off of a friend who was getting out of farming, and just to get it up and running, I had to get new wiring in the part of the barn that I had it, and then it couldn't fit where I wanted it to because of a couple inches of the reefer unit and where the beam in the ceiling of the barn was. So then I had to move it and get gravel delivered so I could make a new base. And then halfway through the season, the reefer unit stopped working, and then you get an electrician out, and then you just buy a cool bot because fixing a reefer unit is really expensive. So there's always these unexpected things that come up when you're farming, and farming is hard enough to do, let alone having all of these extra things weighing on you. So it's really nice to have a little bit of extra room in your budget to be able to deal with your hurdles and just move on and get back in the field or get to market or do what you need to do to keep moving that food. Then you do it, and like you are all of a sudden growing food, and it's really fun, and it's super hard, and it's a whirlwind of emotions, and don't forget to enjoy it. I was in a panel yesterday, and one of the question was, what is one of the resources that have helped you in your business development? And I didn't have a specific resource that I could point to, except for the fact that I really heavily leaned on my farming community this year. When I had questions or didn't know a pest or what was going on, I reached out to friends. I reached out to my old boss who I hadn't worked for in years. When I had questions about a deer fence, I reached out to a pal who I had met in real life once, and he was amazing. And I have a farming friend who's in the same region as me, who I commiserated with on a daily basis about all the new pests that we were dealing with or how hot this summer was. It's a really tough industry. And as you all know, like we get one shot a year, and it's so important to keep your network of farmers large, because then you can learn from someone else's mistakes, and then you can make different ones, and then you can teach someone about your mistakes. And it's this beautiful circle of knowledge sharing, and it's a really cool space to be in. And that's it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Isabel. And I really appreciate your candor. I think to be able to show people, what you're bringing in, how you're spending money, I think that's incredibly useful for young and new farmers in particular. So now we're getting into the question period. So feel free to put your questions in the chat or raise your hand. That should be in the reactions menu, probably at the bottom of your screen, and then I can call on you. To begin with, though, there were a couple of clarifying questions for Isabel. Maybe just we'll do those rapid fire. So Isabel, we had a question. People wanted clarification on the groups that you worked with for your business plan.
It was called Futurepreneurs, so I think someone wrote it in the comments there.
Perfect. And was there a particular small business center that was helpful to you as well that you can name for people?
So I worked with two. The first one that I worked with was in Cornwall, because I was originally going to rent land there. And then the second one that I worked with was in Kemptville, where I am now. So it will be specific to the region or the town that you're in.
Perfect, thanks. And when you say that you pay $70 per acre for rent, the question is that annually or monthly?
Annually. Although I have talked to some people, and $30 per acre is not unheard of, and $70 for tiled land is sometimes more common. I think it depends on where you are.
Great, wonderful. So I'd like to ask the same question to both of you, but from kind of different angles. So for Isabel, I would ask, what do you wish that you had learned about finance or business while you were working on other farms? And for Sally, what do you wish that people knew about finance or business when they were applying to the Fair Finance Fund? Maybe Sally, I'll ask you to start.
Unless you want to go first, Isabel. So what do I wish they knew? I think that's it really varies. So I mean, the fact is that Isabel came to us and it was great. It's like I didn't wish she knew anything, except that we were thrilled to have her. So but I think people are at different stages. I think one of the things that I see is the sort of a broad cultural thing is the sort of the uncomfortableness with finances. I think a lot of people, when we're purpose driven, we get into this and then you're like, oh yes, and then I have to figure out cash flow, and I and I think there's a lot of this is taught culturally. I think it's probably worse for women, just having a visceral reaction to having to deal with this. And I think I love numbers. So I think that part of what I think about a lot is how to there's so many, when you're looking for templates, there's so many different ways of looking at it, and some of them For instance, there's some very good stuff that comes from OMAFRA about pricing and everything. It's really, really detailed. So I think what I want to see is people sort of taking control of what they're going to say about their finances, how detailed it really needs to be at whatever stage they are. And I think not to be fearful about it. I mean, I think like Isabel said, you know, we all make mistakes. That doesn't mean that you don't understand finances. I think, and one of the messages that I sort of keep putting out is we are all embedded in the economy. And the fact that we have this feeling that we don't understand economics has been taught to us. And, you know, and so it's actually really important social justice movement building that we take back control of finances and, you know, not saying I can't do this, but saying this is how it's going to work for me. So that's a bit of a broad answer, but that's I think that's, you know, we need to teach finance differently and that kind of thing. So.
Great. Thank you, Sally. And Isabel, what do you wish that you had learned maybe about finance or business while you were working on other farms?
That's kind of a tricky question because probably my first like 3 years that I was farming, I literally didn't think about financing farming at all. You know, I was just an employee and I worked on farms and that's what I did. And then as I got closer and closer to thinking about starting my own business, I was lucky. I think that the farmers that I worked for were really candid and I was able to ask the questions that I wanted to ask. And my last boss in BC before I moved back here, like I sat down with her mom who did all her accounting and she like walked me through basic accounting, which was really nice. So I think it's just really important that we just start having more dialogue. Because I think farmers are really willing to share their experiences, because we do need more farmers, but we need farmers without like the rose-colored glasses. Like we all need to go in knowing what it's like and the reality of starting your own business.
I think if I could add, for me, it is a complicated question because we believe in working with people who come to us whose loan application isn't ready yet. And, you know, and that's fine. And we'll, you know, work with people. And so I think sometimes people have sort of hesitated because they felt like they didn't understand a piece of what we were doing. We've heard lately that because we've put credit check on the long list of things we look at, that's a problem, particularly for people who don't have generational wealth. So we're thinking of taking it off. The thing is that we don't rely on that at all, right? I mean, what we do is relationship lending, and so it's much more based on getting to know you. And if we feel like there's a little bit missing in the cash flow, we're just like, you know, why don't you brush that up a bit?
That makes perfect sense. And I invite our participants, if you're ready to ask a question, just you can raise your hand or unmute yourself and jump in at the appropriate moment, or just go ahead and put it in the chat. Sally, you mentioned a word near the end of your presentation that I don't hear very much, agrominiums. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that model and what that might involve?
So anybody who's ever read the Condo Act, the Condominium Act, it's lovely. It's very simple, very straightforward. It's an arrangement for people to be living in, it could be townhouses on the same piece of land. One of the things that it allows for is common space. So why don't we consider agricultural condominiums where people have multiple dwellings, part of the condo, you might be building some equity, and you have a common space, which just happens to be a commercial kitchen where everybody can do their value-added processing rather than a swimming pool. So there's a lot of possibilities in that. The catch to it is that the Ministry of Agriculture is wary of it because it has actually been used to get non-farmers onto land. So We really need another term, but agrominium is pretty catchy.
Understood. What do you think it will take to make that a reality without kind of running afoul of some of some of these problems, these regulatory problems that you alluded to?
I think we need partners who are in housing. So it's part of what I keep doing. I mean, I think this is a property issue. So there's lots of work going on in housing to look at new ways of doing fair housing. So I would go to them and make some good partnerships. So that's part of what I'm hoping to do with our Inclusive Prosperity Project.
Wonderful. Thank you. And we have a question for Isabel in the chat. Just curious, what are your plans for year 2 of Vintage Soil Farm?
Oh, the plans. Planning has just started, just getting into computer mode. We're expanding a little bit. I'm going to be hiring on one staff member for the season. I'm going to be increasing the amount of CSAs I do, and hopefully narrowing down. I went to 2 markets this summer, but one of them wasn't the best. So I'm hoping to get into a different market for one of those weekend days.
Wonderful. And I have and we have another question from the chat. What are your thoughts on the feasibility of natural building to develop an off-grid homestead on the farm? I guess this is more specific for purchasing land. And I guess I'll toss that out to both of you, unless there's a specific person in mind. Who would like to start with this question about natural building?
Can't say I have much to say.
I could step in. I mean, it's a huge question. But I did help start the Fourth Pig Worker Co-op, which does natural building, based in Muskoka, but does work down here in the GTA as well. They're doing an affordable housing project right now. So they are right now some of the main people I'm looking to for innovations around housing. So their affordable housing is natural. And so the part of what the Fourth Pig does is helping people understand that there's in a lot of ways you can do a lot of natural building without being that much more expensive. If you start putting in geothermal and you just start adding other things to it, it does get more expensive. So, I mean, if this agrominium, if we did it, there'd be no reason not to do it natural. I think, in fact, that would be better because it's part of climate resilience. Off-grid, I'll just say, from when I worked in renewable energy and when I worked with Fourth Pig, in some ways, what we need is to think more in terms of community energy. So off-grid, if you have the money to do it, it could be a solution, but we need a solution for energy overall, right? We need this to affect all communities. And energy that's shared, it's more efficient to do a community energy project. So if you look at some of the renewable energy in Denmark and places like that, where it's very much farmer-owned community energy, that's more efficient than having an off-grid. So unless you're somewhere where you really don't have access to the grid, it's probably better to work with the transmission lines.
That makes sense. Maybe I can add briefly to that. I live in a straw bale house that my partner and I built. You can maybe see the curved window in the background. And it worked really well for us. And it was great to have family who could grow straw that we used to be able to grow part of our house nearby. But on the financing angle, some financiers are not excited about giving mortgages for unconventional construction. So I know a number of farmers who maybe wanted to do straw bale or wanted to do, hempcrete or something that's considered more experimental in kind of the conventional finance sector. and they had a lot of challenges with that. So that's something maybe to put into the mix too for your financing needs. A question for Sally. What do you mean in more detail by the term purpose-driven? Some examples.
So purpose-driven would, for us, means that the farms that we support are, for instance, are often very much driven by supporting the environment, contributing to soil health, you know, building more clean air for people and things like that. Like so that when they're making decisions, they are thinking in terms of social and environmental purpose. So and as I said in my favorite slide, to me, that's why they're so effective and successful businesses, because they're considering those things. So to me, it's sort of like we need to check that before we'll look at giving somebody a loan. Other food entrepreneurs, if I think about Chocosol, which is the chocolate company in Toronto that we supported, they are a big part of what they do is to make sure they have training and good benefits for their workers. They're working directly with farms in the South and supporting them. They deliver everything by bike, so they're contributing to cleaner air in Toronto, and contributing to workers who are skilled and who stay a long time. So they're very committed to long tenure for the workers, which is better for everybody. So, I mean, all that to me, so purpose-driven is very broad, but it all ties back to having a stronger economy, people who can afford to buy good food, all that.
Thank you, Sally. Great. We have another question from the chat. Are there any organizations that can help in leasing land for a long term or purchase for a farm project? The realtor.ca and other sites are more commercially oriented. Thoughts from Sally or Isabel on this?
I don't know of any specifically. I didn't have much luck with any online websites or things like that. Like I was on Kijiji all the time. I think there's a couple farmlink.ca or something like that. And then there's the Young Agrarians. It's a bit of an underserved community, I think, right now.
I also heard in Southern Ontario, at least, that so much of the land was transferring hands by word of mouth. And this is a barrier for people who are not coming, who aren't already embedded in farming, right? Because they're just, people are going to church and they're hearing that Joe down the street wants to sell off 100 acres. So I'm still trying to figure out how to untangle that one.
One thing that I really considered that I didn't end up having to do, but I've noticed a lot of the farmers around here, like the old school farmers, we have like a small paper that goes around here and they read the small paper. So maybe if you know what communities you're looking at farming in, like throw an ad in one of those smaller community-based newspapers, and you might be surprised with what came back. There was a feature for my farm in there, and I thought no one read newspapers anymore, but in these smaller, more rural communities, they're definitely more appreciated.
That is true. Yes, and farmlink.net is a great site to help find some potential land opportunities, especially for lease or for land sharing. If you are right now trying to find a potential spot, my colleague Sunil is doing a lot of work about that and helping to connect people. So I'd encourage you to get in touch with him or to fill out that link if you haven't already, about kind of a farmer questionnaire help people find matches. I'll paste that in the chat right now so people can take a look. Great. So our next question, I'm going to ask Isabel a question, actually. One of the things that makes your farm kind of interesting is your use of draft horses. And you spoke briefly about this and how it kind of changed some of your upfront costs in particular. But I would love to hear you talk a little bit more about that, about kind of why you made that decision. Was it a financial decision in part to not have to buy a big tractor? How have the finances worked out after the first year? I'd just love to hear more about that in general.
It was 100% a personal decision. I like working with horses. I worked with horses growing up. I had never worked on a draft powered farm. A friend of mine out in BC is draft powered. So she was kind of like my inspiration and often the one who I called with all my problems this year. But it was purely because I enjoy working with horses, and it gives you a very different connection to the land. So I am majority draft powered, but I rent 6 acres. So I do have the ability to rent a tractor when I need to. So this fall, I was using a tractor in my cover crop fields. And it's just such a different relationship to the land when you're like driving this huge thing and dragging these discs, and like you're kind of just demolishing the soil behind you, and you can't really see the little like divots in your soil or where there's a slight hard pan because you're such a big piece of equipment. Whereas when it's me and the ponies, and then I like just have my small set of discs, it's so much easier for me to see what is going on with the land. And then you can kind of follow that as you like plant into that compacted spot, and you're like, oh, well, that kale didn't grow. So I knew that was coming. So it's purely because I enjoy doing it. And then the fact that I could actually afford the equipment was a bonus, because I was able to get a lot more equipment this year than if I was working with a tractor, purely because it's smaller equipment, it's cheaper to buy, and it's also really easy for me to fix. So it's very non-mechanical, which is great.
Great. And we have a number of questions about your horses or ponies. So when you say ponies, are they halflingers? And also, what are the pros and cons of for having mules or donkeys as opposed to horses?
Yes, they're halflingers. Yes, they're ponies. I'm tiny, 5'1", so I need a small team. A lot of those big Belgians, I would literally need a step ladder to get to. I don't know much about working with mules and donkeys. I follow a couple cool people on Instagram who work with them and who work with oxen, and that is just like a completely different ball game. I bought some equipment from a guy who used mules, and he loved them and said they were really stubborn, but that's really my only knowledge for that.
Understood. Thank you. Great. So in the chat, we've seen a few different people who are maybe looking at owning land collectively, whether that's through a co-op or a collective or partnership or some other model. What advice would you have to someone who's kind of getting into farming or ready to settle down, and they're trying to think about what model is actually best for them? What kind of tips would you give them as part of that initial thinking, as part of those initial conversations, potentially with land partners? Sally, would you like to go first?
Me? Okay. So you're saying how do you, it seems your question is twofold, right? You're asking how do you come up with the structure that you want to use, and then how do you talk to a landowner about it?
Or land partners who maybe
land
also don't have land yet, potential partners.
Oh, okay. So that's okay. That's easier. I think if you're looking at a collective model, there's all kinds of support for starting a co-op. I am, if it's a farm co-op, I'm always happy to spend some time with you and share all of my resources. The local food and farm co-op network that's what they do. They help people develop co-ops, also the Ontario Co-op Association. So just a sort of couple of quick things. Because when I take a new group through developing a co-op, the absolute first question is, a co-op is there to serve the members' needs. So you have a group of people, you need to discuss your needs, see where the overlap is, and develop the co-op to meet those needs. And it can change. The first set of needs might be marketing together. You don't really have land, but you want to market together so that you have more diverse products. Like something like Plan B is done, where they worked with other farms. But it might end up that then you're looking at land and looking to buy together, looking to put some equity into it. So it can be a moving target, but a co-op needs to agree. The other thing is that I really love the worker co-op model for a farm co-op. You only need 3 people, 3 farm businesses, 3 families, whatever it is, but 3 people to sign the initial incorporation documents. And a worker co-op means you are maintaining control of that business. So there's other models. There's producer consumer co-ops like Eat Local, Grey Bruce, some of the others. And I always say in this situation, farmers, this is your livelihood. Like you're committing your life, probably a lot of your savings to it. Consumers just don't have the same stake. So giving them a membership and letting them vote in what happens in the co-op is a problem. So the reason I showed you Glorious Organics is because I think that's a brilliant way to solve the problem. So they have Fraser Common Co-op, which owns the land. So you can bring in investors from Vancouver and, get people who have money and want land to stay in farming. So they own that, they manage that land trust, but the farm businesses are managed by the worker co-op. So those people from Vancouver have no say in how the farm businesses are run. So I think that's a really important thing. I think often when people get into co-ops, they're like, well, we should have everybody join. Like, we want everybody to have a say. Well, put the question a different way. Who do you want to have any say at all in your farm business, right? That's really the question. So that's absolutely the starting point. And then, then you just co-op. The co-op model is wonderfully flexible, and they actually survive twice as long as regular small businesses. So you've got a bigger talent pool, you've got more to draw on, you've got a bunch of people doing different things that you can market together. So it's actually a very, very strong model.
That's great. Thank you, Sally. Isabel, is there anything you'd like to add to this subject?
I don't really have a ton of experience with co-ops in general. I will speak to my own experience. So before I ended up on the land rental that I'm on right now, I had a first opportunity that came to me, and that landowner's vision was more of a co-op model and dividing up their 10 acres into smaller parcels and having multiple people come and work the land, and they were just starting that in 2021. So I was really excited. Like, I planted my garlic there, like I moved a bunch of stuff there. It seemed like it was going to be really, really great. And then we just realized as we kept talking and developing a relationship and getting a lease together, that we just weren't on the same page, and we couldn't really communicate well with each other. So I didn't move forward with that. And I'm really grateful that I didn't, because it just wasn't the right fit for me at the right time. So I think it can be like such a powerful model, but it also needs to be the right people in the right place, and everyone working together for the same things, and not Like I was trying to have a business and she was trying to have a co-op, and I was eventually going to leave that. So it was just, that model didn't, those two didn't marry for me at the time. So I think it depends. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there, I have worked with groups that thought they wanted to do a collective, and it turns out that's not, well, it wasn't really the right structure. So I think it's really important to look at the pros and cons for sure. Yeah, I'm glad you, sounds like you made the right choice.
That all makes sense. Another question from the chat. My main concern regarding land purchase is supply. Would anyone be able to speak to how to find land that is being sold in Southern Ontario that is smaller than 5 acres? Most listings are for $1 million plus and hundreds of acres, which is unrealistic. I believe Sally mentioned severance rules. Can that be explained in more depth? Sally, would you like to start with that one?
Yeah, so the sort of in a nutshell, as farmland was being broken up and sold to non-farmers, and as farmers were selling off their land in little chunks for retirement parcels so that they could fund the rest of their farm business, Ontario decided that the best way to do this was to not allow severance anymore under 100 acres. And that's, I mean, as I said, that's a huge barrier to the kind of farming we need, where people are selling in CSAs and selling direct, and they don't need the 100 acres. And when you're starting a farm, I mean, for Isabel to go into debt for $1 million, that doesn't make sense with the stage that her business is at. So it's not a, you know, it's not a good decision. So I go back to what I was saying, which is that I am trying to see how Fair Finance Fund could have a piece of land that is farmland in perpetuity in some way, an easement or however we do it, allowing people to use smaller pieces of land and still be able to walk away with a little bit of equity. So these are the problems I'm trying to solve right now.
Thank you, Sally. Isabel, do you want to speak to that? Okay.
I don't think I have much to say.
No problem. Yeah, I see a couple of people have chimed in on the same theme. So I guess I just want to kind of validate that problem, because it is a huge problem that a lot of people are having. A lot of new and young farmers, ecological farmers especially, do not need these 100-acre farms and can't afford $1 million. And so I think that the solution is going to involve a combination of things, which could include some land matching with farmers who are sympathetic, but it also requires some policy changes, right? There need to be some policy and regulatory changes that make it easier for sustainable farmers to have access to land at the appropriate scale, without, increasing the conversion of farmland into rural estates or development or subdivisions. So this is something that we are actively working on as well in the NFU, and we'll be focusing, I think, more and more on in some of our land access work in the future. So let's see, there is a quick follow-up question for Sally. I'm not sure I totally follow. In that case, would homesteading and building a home not be possible? I guess in the case of shared land ownership where you were building equity. Yes.
Okay. Well, I don't think there's an assumption that people would ever have to leave. It's just that it would make it an affordable option. Yeah, I don't think it precludes that necessarily. And then I guess that answers the question.
Thank you. Great. So we are coming up on 8:30. So before I ask our panelists if they have any closing thoughts, this is your last chance to ask a question. If you've been keeping silent, this is your chance to either raise your hand or unmute yourself or speak up or put it in the chat. So just pause for a moment to give people a chance to do that if you'd like. So here's one question. Has there been a workshop seminar where landholders explain some of the requirements they have to help new farmers? Yeah, we've had a couple of workshops where we've talked about different kinds of land partnerships, including landholders speaking about what they can offer and what they're looking for. So if you go to the NFU Ontario YouTube channel, you can see recordings of some previous discussions, of some previous panel discussions and workshops. I would recommend in particular that you look at a video from February called Learning from Land Partnerships, which had a great selection of panelists. And also the Land-Linking 2021 presentation that took place at the NFU convention in the spring. All right, a couple of other questions. Where is detailed info and examples for hybrid models? I'm not sure exactly what hybrid models are in this context. Sally, is that something that you can speak to?
Are you asking about models where you've got a worker co-op and a land trust co-op, or so examples for hybrid? Yeah, that's the Glorious Organic. So there's about 25 examples in British Columbia. If you go to community, I think it's communityfarms.ca, but it's a project of Farm Folk, City Folk, and lots of great information there.
Great, thank you. And all sorts asking also about some of the financial insurance and commitment requirements. Those are great questions, and so we have that is covered in some of the workshops. We're also looking at how we can compile some of that information and maybe some kind of best practices in a current way. I'd also recommend, if you haven't already, to look at the land access guide that the NFU helped adopt from Young Agrarians for an Ontario context, and I posted the link into the chat a little bit earlier. So I think we have time for one final question. I'll pull this up from the text. I've seen ads for rural municipalities that in essence give land for a nominal fee, like $500, with the condition of building a home of X value within X time. Is there a consolidated resource that lists these places? Also, what is the possibility of Crown land being granted legally for farming? Is this even possible? So maybe I'll just start, which is that I have not seen a consolidated list of municipalities that are offering that kind of arrangement. I think the ones that I have seen, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sally and Isabel, the ones that I've seen tend to do this for a short period of time as basically kind of a promotional technique to get people moving to their town. And it tends to be for a fairly short window. So I haven't seen a lot of those happening at the same time. They're often in Northern Ontario. And also, what is the possibility of crowned land being granted legally for farming? Is that even possible? Sally, I might pass that one to you if I can.
You finally got a question that I can't answer, but thank you. It's a good one. I'll get to work. Yeah.
Yes, I have never heard of that happening formally, but yes, I'll be curious for us to look into a little bit more. I think maybe one possibility that's a little more realistic is for land trusts, which are not agricultural land trusts, conservation land trusts, for example, to lease some of that land to farmers. Which is definitely something that we're kind of exploring more as an option. All right, so I think now is a great time to wrap things up. So I'm curious, Isabel and Sally, do you have any closing thoughts, anything that you'd like to share with our wonderful participants before we wrap things up for the evening?
I don't have anything like crazy insightful or fabulous to say, except if anyone is looking at starting a farm and has some questions, like feel free to shoot me a message on Instagram or Facebook or wherever you can find me, because I'm happy to, if I can help someone else navigate starting their own business, I'm really happy to. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I mean, this has been, it's great to be here. There's great sets of questions. And I look forward to continue to work on this land question. So thank you for having me.
Well, thank you so much, Sally and Isabel. It's been wonderful to have you here. And thank you for all of these great, encouraging comments in the chat. I'm glad that everyone has learned so much and has enjoyed this workshop and this series. So this is our last land linking workshop of 2021, but we will be doing more. And we want you to tell us what topics and speakers you want us to feature. So I'm putting that link in the chat for a final time. So you can tell us at the NFU Ontario and the Ontario Farmland Trust, what should we do in our next mini-series, which will be happening in February. So we'd love to hear all of your ideas. Thanks again to Isabel and Sally. Thanks likewise to my colleagues at the NFU and Ontario Farmland Trust, Sunil, Catherine, Herschel, and Ashley, all of whom did quite a bit to make these workshops happen. And thank you to our lovely participants for joining us this evening and sharing all of your wonderful questions. I hope that you have a great night, and I look forward to seeing you all again in the future. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.